We're here in the MotoIQ Dirty Ass Alley to check out this badass BMW. This is Tyler Pappas's BMW. We got to see this in Pikes Peak when we were out there. I was too busy to talk to him, but we knew it was a badass car. We knew we had to get it in.
This is definitely the most interesting setting that we have been interviewed in all week, but we're looking forward to kind of walking you through the car here, and we'll just pretend that this is a super fancy movie set.
Well, we do have a super fancy movie set, but this car is like too low, and the aero won't make it into our lot.
Yeah.
So here we are in the alley. So anyway, I really like your car.
Thank you.
I'm a BMW geek too. I guess give us a tour, like starting at the engine since we have the hood open.
Yeah, so this car started off as a showroom factory stock BMW M2 that I bought 2 years ago. The intention was to daily drive it back and forth to work and do some various modifications to it that would showcase off, the skill set of my shop, Tyspeed in Jackson, New Jersey. And the first modification, or one of the first modifications we did to it, was to install a carbon roof. And anyone who's ever installed a carbon roof before knows that that's actually a very invasive process.
Yeah, it is.
So that being said, we probably started off with the wrong project because it opened the door, or Pandora's box, if you will, and it really all went downhill from there. So, yeah, we took the roof off, put that carbon roof on, and with the interior, heavily removed at that point, we decided to just take the rest of it out and put it on a shelf, and promptly got to installing a roll cage on the car. And at that point, there was no turning back. So it has slowly developed over the last 2 years. I shouldn't say slow. It's actually a pretty short period of time, I guess, to develop a brand new platform. But, we've gone from a showroom stock car that no one's really tuned to the top of Pikes Peak in basically 2 years. Luckily, we've had some really great people helping us along the way. I got a great crew at home. My other mechanic, Jeff, has really helped to kind of get this thing sorted out as best as possible. I had a fabricator, my buddy Drew, that helped do the cage for us, originally. And, basically everything we've just kind of filled in the blanks along the way to what you see now. I guess we'll start, since we've got the hood off. This is was a stock BMW N55, which is a single turbo variant, 3-liter. Right from BMW. We ran it stock internally in 2018 with about 475 horsepower, and this year we actually had a incident in preseason testing leading up to Pikes Peak, actually about 30 days out of Pikes Peak. Melted the motor down, had to take it down to the bare block, do a lot of machine work, get both the head and block surfaces straightened out. And as a result of having it all apart, I figured, listen, if we are already here, we might as well put in some CP pistons and Carrillo connecting rods. VAC Motorsports helped supply us with some bearings, ARP stud kit for this motor. So we took advantage of it while it was completely disassembled, put all the good stuff in there. Even though this motor is forged from the factory, I figured using I-beam connecting rods and proper forged pistons was going to be a better avenue for us to go moving forward. So we took advantage of that. We did that over the off season. Hopefully this motor should support the 750-800 horsepower mark that we're looking to achieve for 2020. We learned at Pikes Peak that 505 horsepower is actually 375 or so horsepower at altitude, so it was basically like driving the stock M2 once we were out there. But back at sea level, 505 on this car, believe it or not, with 295 Toyo RRs on all four corners, it is not that scary to drive. But we've got the power plant running really well. Tuning has been dialed in by Frank Smith out of Maryland. It's running an XDI 35i, which is an upgraded high-pressure fuel pump. It's got a 35% higher capacity than stock, so we don't have to make any other fuel system changes other than the delivery pump. So no port injection or anything like that. We are running methanol injection, not to raise boost pressure or anything like that, because we are already running MS-109 fuel, simply just to cool charge air temperatures as much as possible, as well as a external sprayer here, which I know you're familiar with. For cars that run Pikes Peak, it's very important to have that spray bar on the outside to keep temperatures down on the cores.
Yeah, no matter what kind of heat exchangers you have, you got to have the coolers, because I think the ability of the car to cool goes down by more than half as you get to the top.
Yeah, and originally developing this car in 2018, we had cooling system problems. That's where we linked up with Robbie from CSF, And between the two of us, we were able to work up some solutions after some trial and error to get the best possible cooler setup on this car, which I think is obviously the trick to running this N55 motor. And I get asked all the time, like, oh, why didn't you switch over to the S55 or whatever? You know, we were pretty fully invested in this platform as it was, and I wanted to kind of keep it, you know, the way that it came as an N55 M2. So it took some work, but we have it running well now. This car can do, you know, 40-minute sprint racing and club racing events like NASA and BMW Club, and run it wide open throttle the whole time, 500 horsepower without overheating. So we've definitely made some serious strides in that arena.
What CSF products are you running on the car?
Yeah, so Ravi helped to make us a AC Delete, like super thick core radiator. So we have that installed here. Originally, we were running their remote oil cooler, which is normally mounted in the fender here. We've now since replaced that with another OEM BMW radiator and looped off the cooling system. So we now have 3 radiators on this car with an auxiliary booster pump, which actually sits underneath the headlight here on the left-hand side. That was one of the secrets to keeping the coolant temps down. We never really had a problem with oil temperatures on this car, especially now that we've mounted in one of their universal inline oil coolers, which we have V-mounted in the front bumper here. It's 275 cubic inches. It basically added 3 or 4 liters of capacity to the system as well, which just helps keep the heat soak down. So we really rarely ever see over 250-degree oil temperatures, despite the fact, you know, we're running over 500 horsepower for a long period of time. So that's been very helpful. It also has their dual pass DCT transmission cooler, because this is the 7-speed factory transmission from BMW with just a flash on it and additional cooling. And they're running their stepped bar and plate intercooler with the round tube on it, which is just nice and definitely helps in the aerodynamic department as well. So for 2020, I'd like to redevelop the cooler stack on this car, and using some of the products that we already have, I just want to reorient them to promote singular flow through each cooler, as opposed to having to have them stacked. Like, for example, our transmission cooler is obviously in the factory location, which is in front of the radiator. The intercooler blocks part of the radiator as well. So there's a lot of things that are blocking direct access of airflow, even though we've done our best to enlarge all the openings and get as much air channeled through this as possible. I think just some re-engineering in the off-season, when we have some more time, will help it be more effective, and then that will allow us also to further tweak our aerodynamics, which we have actually already done by going to the A2 wind tunnel in North Carolina. So we did that before Pikes Peak. We actually took this car into a wind tunnel. We learned a couple little things about the splitter angle, some of the barge boards and blocking plates that we put to help channel the air around this car to take it from making lift to making actual downforce.
That's super awesome that you actually got to go to a real wind tunnel. I mean, for us like normal people that aren't F1 or open wheel or prototype racing, that's like a dream.
Yeah, it was actually probably one of the coolest experiences that I've had with building and developing this car, and luckily we have good enough access that we can go back there if we need to, which we probably plan to do before the 2020 season after we make some changes to the car. And it was super insightful, and it actually just kind of like makes me laugh now, just like walking through a paddock, because you look at all these cars with all these wings and diffusers and splitters and everything mounted on it, and it's just, for me personally, it was great reassurance, because, you know, you can bolt all these things onto your car, but if the angles of attack aren't correct, if they aren't working well in you know, unison together, you actually may be hurting yourself more than helping, right? And so that really opened up our eyes and allowed us to understand exactly what we had bolted onto the car and make most effective use out of the components. I think at 100 miles an hour between the front and rear, we're only making about 800 pounds of downforce, which, you know, that sounds high, but it's really not for a true unlimited time attack car. I think that this car should make, I'd like to have 1,000. I think that'd be a really good target number for us to get. And I think hopefully by adding and building off the floor this year and making a complete flat floor, adding some side skirts, and making some additional aero tweaks to where the air is routed through the front of this car will help bring some front end balance back, as well as adding additional downforce.
I mean, 800, still nothing to sneeze about.
Yeah, true enough. You know, although the thing is, you know, being that this is obviously a FR platform, you know, if it was all-wheel drive, it would probably make less difference with the balance that we have, but it is like, you know, not quite what we want it right now. Let's call it 70-30. That back we can turn up pretty significantly and make even more than, you know, we discussed, but realistically, it just makes the front end push, because we're kind of limited to about 325 or 350 pounds of front end downforce. So the rest of that coming from the back, and if you know, outbalance it, then the car becomes, you know, almost impossible to drive no matter what suspension settings you go for.
I know, like, weight distribution is a big problem. What have you done to combat it in yours?
Yeah, so obviously that's a factor. BMW's come perfect 50-50 from the factory, but by changing a lot of the front end around on this car, adding all the aerodynamic components, the additional aftermarket coolers, all the lines, the bigger wheels and tires, it really did shift the weight around a lot on the car. Obviously adding a Cajun, that's 200 plus pounds of chromoly steel going back in, so it changes a lot of where the factory weight sat on each wheel on this car. So through careful use of corner balancing, using scalings and pads, we were able to kind of move some of the system components around to try and keep that optimal weight balance. It's not perfect, it's not factory. The car is very well drivable, luckily, due to the suspension setup and what we've been able to accomplish. On the front axle, we are within 1 pound or so when we do our corner balancing. The back has about a 38-pound spread between the left and right tires, which is minimal. I mean, honestly, if you could tell that as a driver, you probably should be the engineer, not the driver. I know I can't tell the 38-pound difference from the left to right wheel. This thing steps out enough as it is, so it really doesn't seem to affect the way that it drives too much.
Yeah, so I think your weight distribution is probably like a huge advantage, especially in the low-speed turns.
Yeah, I mean, this car does have pretty good grip. It originally had a lot of imbalance in the front before we developed the aero, and the car always pushed no matter what we seemed to do. We've worked pretty closely with JRZ and ground control to get some of the suspension components dialed in, the spring rates proper, to try and get this car to be more athletic on the front and as far as turn-in is concerned. I think that's a problem that a lot of these cars face, especially from the factory. They come inherent to push. It instills confidence in the car, in the driver. So dialing that inherent trait out is difficult. It takes a little bit of commitment, let's call it, and it makes you have to kind of adjust your driving style some. You got to be very patient with turn in and apexing down to corners, and just let the car kind of do its thing and take its set before you can really get on the gas. I think I've kind of learned how to drive around it, and that's just kind of using more throttle and getting my angle of attack to be a little more aggressive as I approach apexes, getting the rear end to be out, and I'm more comfortable with controlling the car and kind of getting it to be there at all times. Obviously, you got to maintain, your tire wear and life and stuff like that. I'm not talking about Dio Shihara style drifting through a corner, but I am talking about getting that rear end slipping to help that angle of attack as you go through your corners. So definitely having a proper weight distribution helps. And like I said, we've done things to combat that by moving components around in the car that we need to run to put the weight where we want it.
Why don't you give us some details about your suspension?
Yeah, so it's got JRZ RS Pro 2-ways on it. We may be making a switch over for 2020 because we've kind of maxed out the setup that we're currently utilizing. All the hard parts are ground control for the adjustments, spring perches, things like that. It's got H&R race sway bars on it, front and back, which could actually use replacement as well this year because we would like to go with a softer spring rate and just use a heavier bar. That being said, some of those components are not yet available or not yet made, so we may look into fabricating some of our own components.
Like the Speedway engineering stuff or something?
Yeah, like Speedway Motors makes those sway bars that you can buy in different round stock and thickness, wall thickness, and then we'll just make our own attaching arms for it. I think that'll be something that we can definitely work out, and it should be actually very straightforward in the back. The sway bar is very straight, laterally placed over the rear axle, so it actually might be something that's not too hard to work on. But yeah, as far as the suspension goes, it's pretty much what it is. 1,000 inch-pounds in the front, inch-pounds in the front, and 1,200 in the rear. We are having some problems at speed still with that compressing, even though it's at a factory ride height. At about 80 to 100 miles an hour, we've gotten a lot of pictures of the side of the car at speed, and you can see it's pretty much tucking those wheels at that speed just because we're making so much downforce in the back. So we're going to look into changing the valving on the shocks, upping the pressure. We'd like to lower the spring rate overall, though, so we're hoping that the damper changes will help us stay within that spring rate or some percentage of that, because any stiffer and this thing will become a Formula Drift car.
I know by going soft, you're going to have a big advantage in the mechanical grip parts of the course. And Pikes Peak, a lot of it is mechanical grip areas where the aero really isn't coming into play that much. So it's possible that could be a really good strategy.
Yeah, I think so. We made a point to talk to some of the top performing teams there in 2019. And pretty much everyone we talked to that we respected and saw as performing well there, all hinted us on to the fact that they were actually running an extremely soft spring rate, with stiffer on the valving and the dampers, and then also using large bump stops to prevent the nose from hitting on impact zones, as well as then helping to kind of even out that aero balance, right? So It was kind of a cool thing to learn because we had gone there with one idea and one mindset, and really we left knowing that we were actually basically 180 degrees off. So that's really great information for us to go back to the drawing board with next year and hope that we can dial in a much better setup.
I actually think you're running like a radial, so I think that your tires are more sensitive to tire shocks. So that might be a good strategy. It's probably worth testing it.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, springs are springs, right? So as long as we have a damper that can react to that lower range, and you know, we have the support that we need on the engineering side of things, you know, we do have the ability, and we actually have the components which we'll be installing in the off season, a full set of shock potentiometers. So we'll be able to feed that data back to whatever suspension engineer that we are working with, and that they can help make us the right adjustments, especially, you know, not just at Pikes Peak, but whatever other events that we do during the year.
What have you done for brakes? Because it's hard to keep your brakes alive at Pikes Peak because the fluid wants to boil so easily.
Luckily, we've been able to link up locally with one of your guys actually here in the area, Stop Tech. Brad helped by kind of taking on this project personally in 2018 after we actually were having some failures, and he was able to come in and help us get the whole system dialed in appropriately for the car in terms of sizing and everything like that. So it's 380 millimeter rotors front and rear. They are the same size. That helps with heat dissipation, obviously. 6-piston STR60 kit in the front, 4 in the back. And we've been experimenting with different caliper bore sizing over the course of the last 2 seasons. So we actually have one more change that we're looking to make this weekend here at Buttonwillow. They're bringing us a couple sets of calipers, and we're going to change it out with them there live so that we can really get some intense feedback. We're going to be measuring temperatures. We're going to bring a whole new friction compound on the pads. You know, we've been trying to really hone in on that. We've had consistently high brake pressure, and we'd like to see a reduction in that pressure with a similar amount of effectiveness because we are killing front pads. So definitely an area that still needs some work, but compared to where we've been at, it's definitely a huge improvement over 2018. And honestly, the brakes were one of our least concerns at Pikes Peak because honestly, I probably wasn't driving fast enough to really push it. Even though we were, you know, looking like we were going to have a qualifying time that would have put us around 10 minutes and change in the dry, I really think that this car's got quite a bit more left in it. And being that it was my first time there, I really wasn't pushing too hard in terms of my braking zones and things like that. I was really just trying to learn the track, and so I think that helped kind of keep the wear and tear down on the brakes quite a bit.
Wow, 380 is huge for a car of this size.
They are big rotors. That has a lot of ability to dissipate heat. We do still see high caliper temperatures. This is a 3,200 pound car with me in it, and sometimes at our local tracks like Watkins Glen and stuff, when we're doing club racing, we're frequently seeing 140 plus on the front straightaway, 162 plus on the back straightaway in a 2-minute lap spread. So I mean, that is really some serious heat cycling on the brakes, and it makes sense that we are pushing the ability of this manufacturer, but I'm sure really any with this brake setup on this car.
Are you running the stock hydraulic system for your brakes with the ABS, stock master cylinder, and stability control and everything?
Yeah, so this is a DSC Mark 10, which is just the latest and greatest from BMW that came stock on this car. We've reflashed it to raise some of the threshold parameters in terms of lockup and basically what pressure input it sees before it decides that it's entering ice mode or one of those other default situations. That has improved the braking stability significantly. We had a lot of problem with it kind of wandering under braking in 2018, just because I think this car is designed, when they design an ABS braking system, when they program that DSC system, it's with a car that's 3,680 pound stock, and you're on a 220 treadwear Michelin Pilot Sport tire, so they're able to factor that unsprung weight, that grip level, everything into the calculations they make for that ABS. And now we're throwing a 10.5 inch wide wheel with a 295 slick on it, and we've taken 400 pounds out of the equation and added 200 horsepower. So basically all that math that they designed that system to work on is completely out the window, and so it really requires a revisit, and we're lucky enough to work with somebody that was able to help us get that dialed in properly and make the changes to make this as effective as possible.
That's super cool that you're able to get the hydraulic system to work.
Yeah. I mean, the stock master cylinder, the ABS system is fully intact. BMWs, I mean, you as an enthusiast of BMW should know that, especially from E46s on, or 03 up really, with DSC Mark 60, have always been actually really great on track. I mean, to the point where there are a lot of people out there that are actually making aftermarket Mark 60 kits to retrofit into really any car. as a standalone system. I've seen people put them on Toyotas, Subarus, you name it. So it's actually a pretty fantastic system. It works quite well. And this is not even that. This is the latest and greatest. So really, like, it might as well be Bosch Motorsport ABS, just with the flash we get on there, without the availability to dial in, I guess, the sensitivity. But really, not an issue so far with this car.
And I see you're running the dual clutch transmission, and I think that's like awesome. Like, you could probably get your shift times really low and concentrate more on driving, right?
Yeah, I mean, I drove this car before I bought it, both in stick and DCT, and as an owner of all manual transmissions up until that point in my life, with the exception of like my shop truck, I was actually really impressed with how fast the DCT shifted, and it was almost a no-brainer as I was there at the dealership going, like, weighing the two options. It was just so much faster, like, in terms of raw acceleration and control. And you say that, yeah, it is nice to be able to have like the quick shifts on the paddles, and we have an aftermarket KMP drivetrain steering wheel that helps with that. Although what would be something funny that I'll point out that I've done many times, and I have no problem embarrassing myself saying this, is sometimes you get in the heat of the moment while you're racing, and it's very easy to click down twice instead of once, and it will just skip gears. So with a manual transmission, and it's very definitive usually if you're shifting what gear you're putting it in, right? Because you're matching up to a gate. But this is like playing Forza on your video game at home, and you can easily just go twice in a row, and then all of a sudden your power just totally kills, and you're fumbling to make that correct shift again. So it makes it easier to screw up, I guess. But it also, when you do have a down pat, and now that I've got some serious seat time behind the wheel of this car, it does make it a lot faster on the track, and you can concentrate more on your driving. You can also left foot brake, in pretty much any situation, which I pretty much drive this car like a cart. I'm always using my left foot for the brake. Doesn't really matter the corner of the track, and it really just helps that, take away on that delay from gas to brake transition, which is proven further by looking at my data. My brake and throttle inputs are milliseconds apart by using 2 feet as opposed to having to transition from one to the other.
Yeah, I mean, I think as the transmissions become more and more advanced, this is the way of the future. And I know a lot of the people that are into, your conventional manual transmission get all up in arms about the driving experience, but I'd rather go faster, right?
Right, definitely. I mean, if we're spending all this money to develop this platform, and that's the technology that's available to us, I mean, I saw no reason why not stick with that and utilize it to its full potential. So that's why we decided to stick with the DCT, which, by the way, has given us absolutely no trouble. I mean, we're on stock clutches. We've done nothing but service the fluid, stay up on that. We're running the CSF dual pass cooler, which helps keep temperatures down. We rarely see temperatures over 210 degrees on the transmission, despite the fact we're going to tracks that have a lot of up and down shifts and things like that. So really not a big thing on our radar as far as of development. We'll just make sure that we keep it serviced. Next year we'll be switching over to Dodson Motorsport clutches to help that increased power.
Now that we're talking about your drivetrain, what do you got in the differential?
Yeah, actually, believe it or not, that's the weak point on the car. We're running the factory electric locking differential from BMW. It's basically an open diff with a clutch pack in it, and then it's electronically locked with a stepper motor that grabs a clutch pack that's mounted to one of the output shafts on the diff, right? So it has an ability to pulse width and modulate that as we go through a turn. Unfortunately, it's not always programmed, I think, in a way that's intuitive to driving a car on a racetrack. So next year we'll be looking to switch over to either a weight track or a similar mechanical or ATB style differential, and we'll code the electronic part of it out of it so that the car doesn't even know that it's not there anymore.
I really like the OS Geekin differentials.
Yeah, the clutch type, I mean, I've actually installed those before on an E46 M3. They work pretty well. I think that we had some interest this year at SEMA from the guys at WaveTrack or the people that represent them here in the U.S., and they don't currently have an application to fit the F8X platform, but I believe that it's due out in the next couple of months, and they'd like us to be one of the test beds for that, so we're going to give it a shot.
Very nice. Yeah. So we talked about your front splitter. You have a rear wing and a rear diffuser also.
Yeah.
What's going on with that?
Yeah. So AJ Hartman, who's in New Jersey near me, manufactures all these components in house. He did a lot of CFD analysis on it before he made the components, and he was able to help kind of create a package around what our target downforce numbers were. We found out that once we got to the wind tunnel, they were a little lackluster. In other words, the CFD was a little over. In terms of expectations of what we actually found to be on this car. A lot of the analysis too is done at a much higher speed, and we were analyzing the car at 100 miles an hour. That can be scaled up or down. There's a lot of black magic in aerodynamics, I'm sure you know that. But in terms of a privateer team with what we have access to, I think that we have this dialed in as best we possibly can. But yeah, it's a dual element wing. I usually run it pretty low profile, no more than 7-10 degrees on the main element, and up to about 23 degrees on the second element, depending on the track and what kind of grip we're facing. Yeah, we got that dialed in, and the diffuser itself really is more of a drag reduction device right now because we don't have a full flat floor. As we go into 2020 and hope to add that full flat floor to the car, I think the diffuser will become much more effective as it has something to really feed off of. But right now it's mostly A, for looks, and B, just for drag reduction.
What's going on in the interior of your car?
Yeah, so that's actually one of the things I'm most prideful on this build. I have been around racing for a long time, and one thing I always noticed, and one thing I always try to keep true on all my racing cars that I built through my shop, or anything that I've helped anybody else develop, wiring is one of my specialties. I've had to reverse engineer the entire wiring system on this car from factory. We removed over 13 of the ECUs that it came with. It still functions, perfectly as designed. So wiring is always a clutch part of any build for me. We tried to keep all that stuff as clean as possible, despite the fact that BMWs are just filled to the brim with wiring. We removed a ton of it, cut it out, rerouted it, things like that. We moved all the electronics and battery stuff that was originally in the trunk forward to the cabin to make room for the fuel cell in the back. Basically, we obviously have the cage in there. I made a custom sheet metal dash, and my buddy at 9 Stitch in New York wrapped it for us in Alcantara and stitched it up orange with my logo and everything to match. It looks really nice. Sparco Circuit 2 seat, brand new. It's a 2019 model, or actually I don't even know if it's released yet. That was actually a big hookup from Sparco. Alan hooked me up on that, and just we wanted a nice head containment, super protective seat. Take to Pikes Peak. We lowered it down. We mounted it basically right to the floor, and as a result of that, actually I couldn't see over the factory dashboard, so we ended up making a dash that didn't have any bumps on it, so that I could actually see over it. So that was kind of clutch. And we got that. We have a BMW Motorsport actually makes 2 factory parts that we have on this car out of the 235 IR race car. That's the carbon one-piece center console and the carbon footbox. Everything in there bolts together really nicely, and it has a nice fit and finish to it. We added some carbon panels to the doors and stuff like that, just to kind of make the car look as finished in factory as possible, despite the fact that obviously it's a long way from it.
Yeah, I was really impressed with your interior fitted finish, especially considering it's a race car. What kind of fuel cell and fuel pumps and stuff do you have?
Yeah, so this car is running a Pyrotech 15-gallon cell, road racing cell. It's a wedge style, so all the fuel kind of drains down to the bottom of the tank. It's got a trapdoor mechanism that keeps all the fuel in. There's a Walbro 250 in-tank pump that feeds a Radium Engineering swirl pot outside the tank. That's got a Walbro 450 in it, and that 450 feeds this XTI high-pressure fuel pump. This car is thirsty for fuel, obviously, at the 500 horsepower market, and we'll continue to gain thirst as we go up. We do have a lot of leeway right now, though, thankfully, with all those inline pumps and everything. And honestly, the swirl pot system just helps with starvation, because even with that blockage and that trapdoor system in the tank, this car sees in excess of 1.6, 1.8 Gs in the turn sometimes. So when you get down in that low fuel level range, we had problems in 2018 with sucking air. Even though we had 3 gallons or so left in the fuel cell. So I think by taking some preventative measures and adding those components in, it's helped cut down on failures and DNFs and stuff this year in terms of fuel system failures.
Yeah, that's pretty sweet. Is there anything else you want to talk about that we might have forgot?
Yeah, I mean, they're not on the car right now, but I'll be happy to show you guys a picture of, we've had a great partnership with Apex Race Parts. They make some really cool wheels. Right now we have on an older design set of theirs, which is the FL5 style, but we also now have their Arc8 Forged series, which is Arc8R they call it, and they are making fully forged wheels now, which is super cool to see them enter that market, obviously, which has been around for a while, but they're trying to get in at a, like an affordable price point for people. The wheels there, they're 10.5 inches wide, ET40 squared, front and rear. It's a square setup. People always ask me, oh, could you fit a bigger tire, whatever. Honestly, with the power level we're at right now, the 295 on all 4 corners is plenty of grip. Having that 10.5 inch wide wheel on the front really gives it a nice wide stance and helps minimize that understeer. So we're definitely happy with the setup that we're running as far as wheels are concerned. But I mean, other than that, really, the only other thing that this car's got on it that most people don't know, it's got a full AIM data system, runs off the CAN bus. We've got a lot of external loggers and sensors on this car, and I use it for my own driving evaluation, but we also use that when we're working with some of our partners in terms of the cooling system, brakes, and all these various other things. To give them the value of raw data back to their engineering department, which we feel a lot of private teams don't necessarily do, and especially in the terms of getting connected with sponsors. So that's one thing that I've been able to offer back to the people that have helped us, and it's really kept our relationships with these guys strong.
Well, that's awesome. I think this is one of the favorite cars that we featured so far, and I really think our audience is going to dig this car too as much as we do. Thank you very much for taking your time, bringing this out here, maneuvering your trailer through this like lame-ass alley, almost getting stuck, and doing the Austin Powers.
Yes.
And still maintaining your cool.
Yeah,
I mean,
well, not really. I did hit the steering wheel once or twice on the way in here, but I just needed to vent my frustration of getting a 60-foot truck and trailer wedged into an alleyway. But luckily, we're all set up now. We're good to go. I think I can see the light at the end of the tunnel getting out of here, and hopefully I don't have to brush up on my trailer parking skills any further for the rest of this week for sure.
I heard something like you hit an outhouse.
Yeah. We actually locked some guy in a porta john over there. He was starting to get pretty pissed off, but we luckily were able to let him out on the way out.
Man, shit happens.
Yeah, shit happens, I guess. You're right about that.
Well, thank you once again for coming out. It was awesome.
Yeah, thanks for having me, guys. I appreciate it. Yeah.